What's up everyone, welcome to the first tutorial in the series. Here we're going to build up our basic interface, and this will basically comprise the entire main page of the app. It's just a really simple calculator, one-page app. So the first step is going to be to start up a new project if you haven't already. So let's get that going. We're going to select a new Flutter project. It will just be a Flutter application. I'm just going to call this something like calculator. Okay. And I'm going to put this in a specific location. I think that's where I want it saved anyway. Make sure the SDK path is correct. Do, again, choose exactly where you want to save this. Make sure it's there, because if you try to move it around, it could mess up the file system. So we can provide a description for this if we want. I'm just going to say a simple calculator with plus, minus, multiplication, and division operations. All right, so let's click next. Enter your company domain, and then let's finish this guy off. So this is just creating the project. It's going to come up with that default template. We're probably going to clear all of it, well, almost all of it, as we want to provide our own completely different layout. So let's start by thinking about how our app was laid out in the demo. Well, we had a text up top that was just a way to output the numbers and the results. And then we had basically 4 rows of 4 buttons. So we've got the 4 basic operations. We had 4 numbers. Those were 7 through 0. Then we had the 4, 5, and 6, and then we had the clear button, and then we had 1, 2, and 3, and the equals button. So I know this calculator doesn't really have everything that we might need. For example, it's lacking a decimal place, it's lacking parentheses, and there's a lot of other operations that we could include, but we're trying to keep things as simple as possible. Again, the main goal is to get you into the process of developing apps with Flutter rather than developing a really good standalone app. So the first thing we want to do here is actually clear out all this extra noise. We can get rid of these comments. Okay, by the way, I know my text is quite big. That's for your guys' benefit. If you want to change your text size, you could do Command and comma, or go to Preferences. And if you go to Editor, Font, then you can change your size up there. Okay. So what else are we going to do? Let's just keep on removing these comments. We don't really need them. In fact, in our My Homepage state, we can get rid of almost all of this. Okay, we can get rid again of these comments. We don't need them. Get rid of these comments here. Okay, and same with the center. And actually, we can get rid of almost everything within this column. So let's get rid of that stuff. We'll clear out the children, but I think we'll leave the column for now. And then we'll clear out the floating action button also. Don't really need those texts either. Okay, so looking pretty good. We probably want to change this title to something like simple calculator, or maybe something along those lines. And then we might as well actually get this up and running now while we finish discussing exactly how we're going to go about implementing things. If you do have a version of Flutter, you can upgrade that if you want to. Otherwise, we'll just leave as is. So we know we have a text and a bunch of buttons. We know that the text takes up about half the screen and the buttons take up the other half of the screen. Now that can be easily accomplished by using an expanded widget. Expanded makes things fill up as much size as possible. In our case, we can actually specify that we want the text to take up half the size and the buttons to take up the other half. What we can do essentially is put all those buttons into a few rows. Specifically, we can have 4 rows of 4 buttons. We can put those within a container and then just say that that container will take up half the space and the text on top will take up the other half. Now I know that might have been a lot to take in all at once, so it'll be much easier once we actually get started with the coding. I think we'll get the basic items down on the page first, and then we can work on positioning and sizing them to look how we want. So if we turn to our emulator, it should be still loading, I guess. But once that's done, this is all that's on the page. There's really nothing to our emulator right now. Okay, so let's focus on the code itself. We can actually take out this main axis alignment.center because we don't really care about bringing things to the center of the page right now. So what we're interested in are the children themselves. Okay, so we'll start out with a text, okay? And actually, I'm going to, weirdly enough, wrap this in a container. Okay, you'll see why in just a bit. Okay, so we'll start with a container. Let's wait for that autocorrect or autocomplete to come on. Okay, and I think we'll go with probably two. Actually, no, we'll just go with one container here, and then we'll go with another column down here. So this column is going to contain all of those rows with the actual buttons. So within this container, I'm just going to specify a child to be a text. Okay, we can just have the text 0 being displayed there. That's fine. And we might end up styling that a little bit later, so I'm just going to put those on the appropriate lines. And now within our column, we know we want a bunch of buttons. So we're probably going to have 4 rows, each again with 4 buttons in them. Now, there's going to be a much more efficient way than putting everything within this code here. But before we do that, let's just get the basic first button or 2 set up. So we're going to start off with a row. Okay, column, actually that child is going to be, or I guess it's children. List of widgets. We'll start off with a single row. Okay, like this. We'll have the children of this row be basically a bunch of buttons. So we'll start off with just the first button, and rather than using a basic material button, I'm actually going to use a button theme into an outline button. So I'll explain why we need to do that in just a bit here. So we're going to go button theme, okay, and the child is just going to be an outline button like so. Okay, so onPressed equal to null for now. We'll change it up in a bit. All right. Now, after this, within our outline button, we'll probably need some kind of a text or an icon at the very least, which is explaining what is going on. I'm actually just going to use strings and texts. The icons may or may not look a little better, but we're just, again, keeping things as simple as possible. So let's add the child, which is just going to be a text. This is the very first, the top left button, so that's going to be our addition operation like that. Okay, so we've got our first button up on the screen. Let's do a hot reload and see how things are looking right now. So we've got our 0 right in the center. So I think that defaults to this being centered here. And then we also have our very first button up top. It's kind of hard to see, but there it is. So obviously it's not looking too great right now. We're missing a lot of stuff, and we definitely want this to be bigger and kind of in the bottom right. Don't worry about that. We'll get to it all in due time. We just want to focus on setting the buttons up first, and then we can take a look at how to expand that out. So again, we just want to get everything on the page to start off with. So let's copy this button, okay? And we'll just add a few more. Oops, I think I'm missing a comma there somewhere. I think that comma is supposed to be right there. Okay, and so let's just copy that button theme. There we go. Okay, so the first row would look something like this. Subtract, multiply, and then divide. Okay, and then if we refresh this, it looks a little bit better. Obviously, we want to expand these out to the side. We'll probably want to make these bigger and more readable at some point, but you can start to see how it would come along. So the next row would contain some numbers, the one after that some more numbers, and the one after that would contain the final numbers, the equal sign, etc. Okay. Now, at this point, you might be looking at this and saying, "Kate, this is already starting to get pretty long. Our build method is already from 32 to 80 lines. That's almost 50 lines long. And we've only done one of the rows. We haven't even added any customization yet." So there's actually a much more efficient way of doing this that at the very least makes your code more readable and actually makes it much more easy to maintain and update. And that can be done through the help of a couple of functions. So the way I did this originally is I created a function that helps to create a button like this. The reason being, later on we're going to add a lot more customizations to this button, and every single one of the 16 buttons in our calculator are going to be exactly the same. The only difference is the text on the button and how that text is processed when the button is pressed. So if we create a function that will return basically the same button just with a different title, that's pretty ideal, because then instead of having to do all of this over and over again, we just implement it once and then create a new button. So I'll show you what I mean by creating a function again within my homepage state. So this might be better off done, honestly, as its own separate class. I just found it a bit more difficult to demonstrate that properly with the onPressed functionality. So let's call this function something like create button, okay? And it's just going to take in a string title. And then we'll be able to create a button like this. Okay, so we can basically just copy and paste that code in there. And instead of this text being whatever we've passed in, we're just going to pass in the title there. Now, we want to be able to call on this function and output a button. So we're actually going to output a widget here. And then we'll just return the button theme. We'll put the semicolon there, and now we're good to go. So we can pretty much replace all of this with a call to create button. We need to pass in some text. In this case, we can just do the plus. And the great thing is we can now replace all of this code with exactly that. So we've replaced all of those lines of code. There was probably, there are about 28 lines of code there. We've replaced with just 4 single lines. So then we can do a minus, a multiply, and a divide like this. So we can give this a save, hot reload, and it should look exactly the same. We haven't actually changed the functionality at all. Alright, so this is pretty good. I mean, we've got one of the rows of buttons down. We just need 3 more rows. But that still seems a little bit inefficient. I mean, right now, this entire row is taking up about 7 lines of code, 7 or 8 lines. And that's just going to get repetitive if we're doing one row, then another row, then another row, then another row. Seems like there's probably a more efficient way to do that. And indeed there is. What we can do is write a function that will return our entire row. Because again, almost all of these rows are going to be acting the same. It's just when a button is pressed, we'll have to process its title at that point in time. So what we can do is write another function that will help us to create an entire row. So we can call this function create row or something. It will, however, need to take in 4 string arguments. The first string is going to be title1, okay? And then we can just kind of go from here. So let's just copy, paste, paste, paste. We'll have string title2, title3, and title4. And okay, getting kind of hard to read there, so we can just shunt that down a bit. This is also going to return a widget because remember, even rows themselves are widgets, and we'll need to return an entire row. So we're going to return for now a row, okay, that is going to have, let's do that, is going to have some children. I'll probably have to spell children properly first. Okay, and then that's basically just going to be a call to this create button, just like this. Okay. Except that we're going to pass in the appropriate strings title 1, 2, 3, and 4. So title 1, title 2, title 3, and title 4. Okay, good stuff. Now what we can do is replace all of those calls to create rows, like we can replace this entire thing with just one line of code, which is just going to be a call to create row. And then we can just pass in our strings. So this is going to be, again, this is the first row, so it's going to be the plus, the minus, the multiply, and the divide, like so. Now, what we can do is we can actually just duplicate this 3 times and then pass in the appropriate numbers. So the second row is going to start at 7, then 8, then 9, then 0. This one will be 4, then 5, then 6. And I guess we'll put the clear button here. Might as well, CE is pretty typical. Then we can do 1, 2, and 3, and the equals sign. So let's refresh this now, and let's see if the calculator is starting to take shape. So it looks like it is. This is much better. We now have all 4 rows and basically all the buttons that we want on the screen. Obviously, we still need to work on the spacing a lot, like we need this guy to be about half the size. We need these guys to be half the size of the screen as well. And to expand out, we definitely don't want that space there, and we want these to be a bit more readable. By the way, just as a side note, I know we're building something really simple here, so if you feel like challenging yourselves and going above and beyond, by all means, please feel free to do so. For example, if you want to add extra buttons, maybe a decimal point, a positive or negative button, parentheses, etc., feel free to add those guys in. I just wanted to start us off with something really simple so that you got the feel for how to build an app from start to finish, and then you guys can kind of expand upon it. All right, so I think this one's actually getting a little bit long, so I'm going to pause this section here. I'm going to end the video, and we'll do a part 2 for building up our interface. In the second part, we're going to be actually working on the spacing and the sizing of the elements, and then after that, we can work on styling them, providing some nice like text styles and some colors and stuff like that. Okay, so stay tuned. We'll be right back to finish off building our interface.